Good evening. I will now call the Infrastructure and Community Investment Committee meeting to order, November 13th at 5:30 p.m. This meeting is being held in person and electronically in accordance with the Municipal Act. For the consent items, I will read out the title associated with the recommended motions printed on the agenda to see if members of committee would like to deal with them on consent or hold them for discussion. Items that are not held will be deemed approved by consent with no further discussion. They will then move forward to the next general committee meeting for consideration. There's no public meeting portion tonight, no open delegations, so we'll move right into presentations by staff. There are two presentations this evening. The first presentation is concerning development and environmental protection. Oh, sorry, we're going to do the consent items first. Misunderstood that part. 7.2 we're going to consider after the presentation, correct? Okay, so we'll move into 7.1, Bayview Disc Golf Course. No questions or...
I'll hold it.
Okay, that is held. 7.3, Outdoor Racket Sports Strategy, dated April 2024. And that is approved on consent. So we will go back to the presentations. There are two presentations this evening. Are we doing the presentations before we do the... The first presentation is concerning development and environmental protection. I will now call upon Michelle Banfield, the Executive Director of Development Services, and Stephanie Mack, Associate Director of Waste Management and Environmental Sustainability, to approach the podium and provide the presentation.
Thank you for the introduction, Chair Hamilton. I'm here today with Stephanie Mack, and she's really excited for you all to know that she actually does more than waste. So she's super excited to tell you about the other part of her portfolio. She said, they're going to wonder why I'm standing beside you. And I'm like, we're going to tell them why. So this is another amazing part of her portfolio. And so we're here to tell you a little bit about how we work together with both of our teams as it relates to risk management and trying to keep our drinking water safe.
Well, good evening. It is a privilege to be here tonight to talk about risk management. And I wanted to start by introducing you to the Manager of Environmental Risk Management and Compliance. That is a branch that is part of Waste Management and Environmental Sustainability. Ms. Katie Thompson, she's sitting here to my right, is the manager of that branch. But she also holds a very special title here at the city. She is our risk management official. And that is a position that her duties are designated under the Clean Water Act. And her role is really partly to look at development applications to make sure that we are considering the future of our water supply and source protection in those applications. So that is going to be the focus of our presentation this evening. She leads a team of environmental professionals, whether they be like herself. She's a hydrogeologist, she's a professional geoscientist, and we're very fortunate to have her here, part of our team. Their mandate really is, protection of human health and the environmental compliance side of her group. Just briefly, you'll see them at our beaches in the summer, monitoring beach water quality. They do 24/7 spill response, ongoing environmental protection for the city.
So you might wonder how Katie and her team get involved in the development review process. And, I won't list all of these pieces of legislation, but many times city staff come before council and say, we have a lot of obligations under by the province, as well as our own policies to really try to, in this case, we're talking about keeping our water clean. And so ultimately it's about, for sure, taking a look at all of these pieces of legislation and making sure that what happens through planning and building approvals for new developments keeps our drinking water safe. And so certainly as part of the work that my team does as planners in development services, Katie and her team are really another commenting agency, an internal commenting body when we get development applications. So when we review and we send it out to engineering and to all the other different people to comment, Katie and her group look at development applications from this perspective of making sure we're making our legislative requirements, but also making sure that development applications are not going to impact the City of Barrie on a broader scope. Because often we're asked, well, what are some of the potential risks associated with development? In many cases, people don't necessarily think immediately that a new development might actually impact our drinking water. Like the activities to actually construct, drilling, excavating, all of those sorts of things can actually impact our aquifer. Garbage on site, runoff, stormwater contamination, all of those things actually can impact more than the development site. And so it is complex, and I wish I could stand before you and say every single one of these things is applicable to every single development in the City of Barrie. And that's simply not the case. Some are more applicable than others. Some development sites are closer to our water supply. Some situations are, the aquifer is higher than in some situations than in other situations. The type of construction, whether it's a slab on grade versus a construction foundation that needs drilling and excavating, it all really depends on the site, the area, the context, and what is actually being proposed. So through the development approvals process, we have to work together with the applicant to assess that risk. And again, sometimes to actually be able to assess that risk, we need some more information. So as I said, does every application pose a threat to our drinking water? Not necessarily, which is a good thing, thank goodness, thank goodness. But even the ones that potentially do, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a deal breaker necessarily. It's just about trying to get that information from the applicant and making sure that it's sound information, and it's information that we can actually use to make development decisions. Because keeping in mind, many of these types of details aren't done at the zoning bylaw stage. They're not really done when council would be asking or learning about it. A lot of these things are dealt with either through detailed subdivision design or detailed site plan. Keeping in mind both of those processes are actually delegated to staff for approval. So this is why at a council level you don't necessarily hear about it at our public meetings, because this isn't exactly when we're assessing this information. We're assessing it a little bit further down the road in the lifespan of a development application. And so as I said, sites, and I talked about this just a little bit earlier, where the site is, are they close to our wells? Is there contamination on the site or near to the site, the aquitard, the soil type? And Stephanie and I are here speaking to you about it, but as we say, like, we are obviously here as the leaders of the different departments. It's a science, and so it's not necessarily enough. We hear this a lot from people where they will say to us, you know, I've done a lot of work in the City of Barrie. I know that this is okay. This is okay. I've done a lot of work here. I've never run into this before. And we certainly appreciate the development community that have done a lot of work in the City of Barrie, but as I said, it really, one size does not fit all. Doing work in one area of the city doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna find the same conditions in another area of the city. And again, it really is just talking about a project by project assessment. So, you know, we do actually in the process talk about this with applicants very early in the process, pre-consultation. We talk about the studies that are required, and then we talk about how we work with other environmental agencies as well. So this list of studies in the middle of the page here, those are very standard studies. That doesn't necessarily mean we need 4 different studies. A lot of the time, these bits of information can be included in either one plan, one report, but it is information that we do need to assess. A lot of the times when I hear from applicants, it's because they think something that we're asking for is too much. Like, I've been asked for this study, I think it's too much. I don't think you need it, Michelle. I think your staff are asking for too much. And so I always say to people, if they're looking at their list of studies and they actually feel that way, pick up the phone and have a conversation. Like, it's much easier to hear what they have to say and to kind of triage it at the beginning of the process. What often happens is if people don't necessarily like the requirements or don't understand the requirements, they tend to push off the requirements, continue to move forward with their application, and then this type of information ends up not being available, and we can only go so far. And we have to, again, it's about assessing risk, and there's only so far we can, as staff, take things without these bits of information.
So what are the risks? This illustration is really from our drinking water protection policy. That policy came forward in 2021, and it actually outlines a few of the risks that development could pose to our drinking water supply. And some of them here are ones we don't see very often. So for example, private wells, development around private wells. Obviously in an urban environment, having private wells perhaps isn't something that is dealt with on a day-to-day basis by the team. But there are ones on this list that we are seeing coming forward more often. So as the city changes, as infilling becomes more common, as deep excavation works are proposed, we see that foundation and subsurface activities, the deep drilling, contaminated sites is an interesting one, right? So as properties are being developed on that historically had industrial uses, have contamination, those sites are now coming forward for the team, for Ms. Thompson's team to look at and assess from that source protection lens. When is supplementary information required from this team? So really, if you can look at two buckets, so the site conditions would be the first. So is the property close to a municipal well? Is it in a vulnerable area? Is there soil conditions? Is there something about that site that may require more consultation, a discussion with this team, may require what is called a risk management plan, where we're actually looking to put some mitigation in place to cover what could potentially be a risk. The second is looking at future site activities. So things like waste management. If it was a transfer site, may pose some additional risk. Is there something that needs to be in a risk management plan also to deal with the future use? Salt storage is a big one. Fuel storage. Anything that those activities would pose a risk to our source water. What triggers a more in-depth review? That is a great question. I can tell you that it actually doesn't happen very often. Most often, Ms. Thompson's team is able to look at the application from that source protection lens. They're able to work with the proponent to put in a risk management plan. But there is, I'm going to tell you, some applications that are coming through where they're checking a few boxes, right? So they might have deep excavation works on a significantly contaminated piece of property. So what's proposed technically is beyond the expertise of our team to really to look at. In cases like that, and it is only a handful, those are going for a more extensive peer review to ensure that we are being protective of our source water and our supply there.
Communication and the relationships that city staff have with the development community really are at the heart of success of any development project. So, what helps the process go smoother is, kind of pre-planning, early planning, and those early conversations. And really, as I said, asking why. If you are hearing something, if an applicant is hearing something that doesn't make sense to them, we ask them, just reach out, let us know. Some of the studies, and this might be sometimes when, certainly, and I'm looking over at Ms. Schlichter, we hear a lot through some new developments or companies that want to expand. These studies are going to take too long because sometimes we do need to have different water sampling done at different times throughout the year. Obviously, spring tends to be a little bit wetter. Some of the other seasons are a little bit drier. And if you're really trying to evaluate the impacts of water and groundwater, you need to have that sampling. Rest assured, if people had started their sampling when they probably had their pre-con, the seasonal stuff really wouldn't honestly be an issue. But as I said earlier, sometimes these studies aren't the ones that people jump on. And we kind of get it, like the stuff that the architectural plans, the landscape plans, those are quote unquote more fun to kind of delve into. These types of studies aren't necessarily the fun ones, if I can say it that way, but they are super important. And in many times when we have the pinch points, it is because people haven't started their studies as early as they should. Now, again, it's not all bad news. We have worked really, really closely with the risk management team to stagger some of that work. Like we can issue a zoning bylaw, for example, with a hold to do some more environmental work. We can issue site plan conditions with a condition to do more work. At the end of the day, though, there's only so far you can push some of this data. And so that's where, as I said, we do work a lot to say, okay, well, what do you have now and how can we move things forward? How can we stagger the work? We do that all the time, quite frankly. So as I said, it's about that incentivizing development, keeping the development moving forward while still, being in a position that staff have an understanding of the risk to the municipality. And this is good for the applicant as well. Like no developer wants to pursue something that is going to have potentially bad environmental ramifications. It really is good for everybody to have this type of information.
And if I can leave you with some good news, some interesting news on this front. Of course, we have application review going on over here. But that doesn't mean that the work to better understand our drinking water supply source protection has stopped. We're actually right now undertaking two really interesting studies. The first is an update to our groundwater model. Really important. It's been 10 years. This is a very extensive project. It's a significant investment, $350,000. It is in conjunction with our colleagues in corporate asset management, with water, as we look to the future. So investing in better modeling will help not only on the development side and the applications, but help us understand and plan for long-term growth. We also are undertaking a contaminated land strategy, looking at how can we be prepared for more complex applications on properties that have contaminants. How can we align ourselves with municipalities throughout the province who, we're not alone in this. We are facing the same types of challenges. What are our liabilities when it comes to those properties, when it comes to source protection? So that's another interesting study. We have a significant groundwater, source water monitoring program undergoing that we do every month, and we are nimble to change that as best practices as things change, even informed by the groundwater model to change that sampling program. So lots of good things going on there. And Ms. Thompson and her team do sit around a number of source protection committees showing leadership, and we're really proud of that. Again, we don't do this alone. The groundwater table doesn't end at our municipal boundaries, that we are working to collaborate with our neighbors on this and share information, best practices, and things like that. And lastly, we thought it was important just to put in this slide, really just a commitment of your team here to really protect our groundwater, our surface water sources. We know that drinking water really is important to support long-term growth here in the city. We're here to help. I know Ms. Banfield and I have had numerous discussions about this, in my tenure here at the city, that we are better when we collaborate together, we talk things out, we meet around tables. I had this discussion with Ms. Thompson earlier today, that we're finding we get better outcomes if, especially on the trickier projects, if we sit down collectively, we collaborate, and it helps, those complicated projects move better through the system, through our process. And again, we're just committed to work as a team, and we're here to help. So thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I'll open it up to questions from members of the committee. Councillor Rietma.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton, and thank you for the presentation. We have a series of wells here in the city, and is your work focused on those wells and not necessarily the surface water in Kempenfelt Bay? Is that kind of the focus of your work? Or does it include Kempenfelt Bay as well?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Councillor Rietma. Our work focuses on both the groundwater wells and the surface water system, so Kempenfelt Bay, yes.
I know in our official plan we have these aquifer vulnerability areas. Is that the area that any building is very much scrutinized by your group?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Councillor Rietma. The wellhead protection areas represent the area of the city where there's the highest level of policy under the source protection plan, but we do look for risks across the entire city because the aquifer extends beyond those boundaries.
One area that I'm very interested in and is a potentially really an issue is salt. Is there I know that at the Conservation Authority, we sometimes have reports on that, and it turns out that the City of Barrie is using, I think, 1/3 of the salt per kilometer that we used to use years ago. So pat on the back for the city in terms of reducing salt. But do you see, or is there any way that we as a municipality can further decrease the amount of salt we use on our roads? And secondly, is there a way to encourage private landowners to reduce salt?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Councillor Rietma. I'll start with the private side. When we're in wellhead protection areas, we have a special one in the City of Barrie called an issues contributing area, and that is because we see increasing sodium and chloride trends in our wells, and we negotiate risk management plans with businesses that have large parking lots. So we talk to them a lot about the Smart About Salt program, which talks about putting down the right material at the right time in the right amount. And we write those into, these risk management plans are legal documents between the city and those businesses. So we go out and enforce them. And we have lots of great educational conversations with them, and we're starting to see a change there. Internally, my team works closely with the roads operations and other groups that put salt down at our city facilities through our salt optimization strategy, and we have lots of conversations about how we can drive down our tonnage per lane kilometer, what new technologies may be coming out there, and how we can leverage those to lessen our salt impact.
Thank you. Good questions. Councillor Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton. Thank you for the presentation. How long has this city had a risk management team? Is this something new to the Planning Act?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Deputy Mayor Thompson. I myself have been here since 2015, and there was an RMO in the position. I think she was designated in 2013. So we've been around for over a decade now.
Just to follow up to that, has the legislation changed on what we're monitoring, how we monitor it, or has it just evolved over time based on trends and things were like new technologies and?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Deputy Mayor Thompson. The Clean Water Act has seen some changes in that time. There are new activities that are considered significant drinking water threats. The program has matured as we learn about new best management practices and industry standards, and those are applied through our policy tools and how we work with the different communities.
So on that, would this be a regulation thing across the board, almost like the Ontario Building Code, or is this a made for Barrie risk management policy?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Deputy Mayor Thompson, these requirements are across the province. Any municipality that provides drinking water to the community has a risk management official in place, and we implement similar policies. The Clean Water Act had developed local source protection plans through source protection committees that are comprised of members of the public, municipal members, and industry. So the policies themselves may vary a little across the province to capture the local communities, but in essence, we are all doing the same work.
And my last question is, if an applicant or a developer applies for zoning or a planning act, do we start off, it doesn't matter on the area, maybe to what Councilor Remo was saying, like with the aquifer protection and stuff. So the checklist starts and, you can go through quicker, but the policy, no matter what zone or what area, it starts off and then you can eliminate just by the area. Is that a fair assumption?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Deputy Mayor Thompson. Yes, at the beginning of the process, as Michelle said, we participate in the pre-consultation, so we'll give the applicant the long list of study requirements, and if you find this, then you may have to continue on in the process. There are other pieces of legislation beyond the Clean Water Act that we look at a bit too, the Environmental Protection Act, and at certain points, you can kick yourself out of that process and stop when you've reached a conclusion. So it does depend on the site how far you'll have to go in the depth of the studies.
So this might be for Michelle then, if you, so at the preliminary talks with the developer, you show them there might be seasonal monitoring and stuff, and we've all heard this, it says right in your policy, we don't want to slow down development and stuff and we are hearing that the risk management has slowed down applications and stuff like that. Is there a way that we can communicate with the development community to start these so we're not hearing that, it's springtime and they need to wait for, winter or winter maintenance or a fall thaw or something, or spring thaw or something? Is there a way that maybe in certain areas where we're familiar with going to the next level of study that we can or is that already being done?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to the Deputy Mayor, I would suggest that's already being done. I have looked, because again, when people come to me, I go back and take a look at the comments, and they do seem clear to me in terms of the level of attention. And I think we even have a line that says, you might want to start this sooner, get on this, because this could be. It's a combination too, though, as Ms. Thompson was saying, in some cases, it's the site itself, and sometimes it's the proposed use, and then sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's a tricky site and a tricky use. So, and that's where it said it's not necessarily even, as I said, I can't even stand before you today and say what everybody needs to do, because it really does depend on kind of those three things. We, as I said, we do feel that we tell people early, but you know what? I have an industry meeting coming up at the beginning of December, and I think I'll put this on the agenda and just flag it for everybody again, to just say we had this presentation. They can come back and watch us on YouTube, and we can flag that for everybody again.
Thanks for that. I'll just say this. Thank you for all the work you do. It's the one thing I learned when I was first elected, that water is the one thing we are liable for. So, so I appreciate the work.
Thanks. Any other questions from members on the committee? Any questions from non-committee members? Councilor Morales.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton. Great questions by Deputy Mayor Thompson and great answers by another Ms. Thompson today. I was really impressed. Haven't had a chance to interact before. Ms. Banfield, great presentation on this. My question comes down to this. So to give context to people who are listening, every situation is different in the sense that I've heard comments from applicants, and it's development, but related to water, because when you go density, it affects water tables a lot more. I've heard comments going, staff isn't specific enough. Like, oh, we ran into something at the end, and we didn't say anything in the beginning. And I've also had exact comments, different contexts, where they've said the initial pre-consultation or the first kind of batch back that gets sent from everyone, the comments sounded really kind of like concerns about entry or concerns about clustered amenity area, like basically kind of like they thought it was, that's it, we can't do it. And then later they find out there was concerns, but that one wasn't a red light. That one was maybe a think about it and see if you can do it better. So some people overanalyze the wording, and then some people like just ignore it and then later go, could be more specific. So it's interesting to see both perspectives on this. So here's my question. As it relates to both water policy and either legislation or local bylaws, both with water acts and planning acts, is there any way that staff could implement, and I literally just thought of this on the spot here, listening to the great questions and comments, kind of like a policy deviation index? And what I mean from that is instead of this interpretive, like one developer reads too much into the tone on urban design and then just like stops, and then the other one ignores something that is critical to water, maybe something that is more formalized, because also every planner is different. Some planners will talk a certain way, some planners will feel comfortable going, being a little bit more forward. Some will say, until you submit an updated site plan, I won't give you any comments. And that's, so if we had some sort of a policy deviation, basically how much are you deviating from the letter of the zoning standards, or how much are you deviating from the obligations in the water tables, where it's like kind of like strong green, meaning like you're basically in line, no variations, no likely concerns. Softer green, yellow, red, like red is like, you're not, at that point, staff isn't acting outside the rules that you're governed to by saying like, you're gonna get rejected, but that kind of index. And every time that they get a report back, like the report back, that index can maybe be updated. I wonder is that something you could do, or within the confines of legislation? And if the thing that's stopping it is maybe local bylaws, is there something council could maybe create? Because I think that would create a lot of efficiencies and address concerns.
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Councilor Morales, I'll tell you a very, very short story. When I first started at the City of Barrie and a development application was going forward, and we were almost at the zoning bylaw stage, and a department said they had an issue. But then I saw a comment months earlier that same department said that they agreed with the recommendations in the report. So I said, how is this possible? So I went back to the author, and they said, well, the recommendations in the report were that they needed to do more study. So then they didn't do the more study, so now, or they did do the more study, as Katie says sometimes, and then actually they discovered a problem, so now there's a problem. So it's kind of like how is this possible? So I completely appreciate what people are saying about, some comments are comments that would be nice if you could respond to, versus some comments are deal breakers, if you will. So so I think that's something that I can probably take back, because I feel like when you actually are in the industry, to me, I think it's pretty clear which ones are deal breakers and which ones are nice to haves, but understand that not everybody shares that experience. And so I appreciate that. I mean, I would say back to this particular topic though, it really isn't us. It's not a situation of the city asking for more. Like it really is the city really trying to make sure that we're managing that risk to our drinking water. So from a development review perspective, what's going to be more likely is the staggering of the work versus not doing the work at all, if that makes sense to you. But I do appreciate the red light, green light. I do appreciate that kind of triaging there about like what's nice to have and what's a deal breaker. Did you want to add something? Yeah.
That is actually really interesting, and I got to tell you, I have challenged both of my teams, so on the waste side too, and Ms. Thompson's team, with really looking at how we communicate. Because it sounds easy, right? Like, are we actually communicating very clearly in our responses what we need, what our expectations are, what technical information that we need to make the process go a little bit smoother, right? So, if what we needed was on page 13 and, somebody has to, go through a lot of pieces of paper to get to that, is there a better way? So that I know that is something that we are working on both sides for both of my teams.
And just through your chair, Hamilton, just add to that, Ms. Mack, the better way. I love that segue. I won't tell the whole story, but there was a condo that went up in Ward 9 on Yonge Street. They were approved for an L-shaped 8 stories. And they were concerned that if they went to 11 but got rid of the short part of the L, they were concerned it would trigger another zoning standard or even an OP because of the nature of it. And without going too much into detail, just because it'll take some time. But in the reality, is there a better way? It ended up being a less intrusive development to the physical adjacent single attached home neighborhood. And they actually wrote in saying, give us the 11th story. I kind of made some comments about a year ago. So they're saying, give us that because there was a better way, even though it created more yellow. A lot of developers say we want less yellow on the zoning standards. That also comes down to water, right? Like they're related because the more density, sometimes it's too much for an area. So sometimes there's a better way, but you do want more yellow. And some are sheepish and shy about too much yellow. Another thing I'm experiencing right now is, at least in Ward 9, we're getting more out-of-town developers. So that context of sometimes people just know that they know what's yellow, they know what's green, they know what's red. The culture in other municipalities is very different. So I've had some of them on huge projects right now that are ongoing completely get caught up on something very specific. And I'm like, that shouldn't be a big deal. I'm not making any guarantees. Whereas on something else that is actually vital and important, they thought it was no big deal. So yeah, I'll leave it in both of your hands. I think some sort of, and sorry that I couldn't flesh it out more. I literally just came up with it while listening to the discussion. Some sort of severity index or policy deviation, I think is good for them. But eventually, we're going to see efficiencies in our pipeline as well, and without last minute things. So thank you for the feedback.
Thank you. Mayor Nuttall.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Quickly, just on the Conservation Authority versus our risk management, is there any overlap? Like, are there places where somebody comes in and puts an application in and we're checking the same thing as the Conservation Authority?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Mayor Nuttall, I would say it's actually unlikely that there's overlap. The Conservation Authority, even with the changes essentially now in the City of Barrie, the only conservation authorities are going to look at if there's an actual hazard, which tends to be an above-ground feature. And Conservation Authority, the LSRCA, will also take a look at the phosphorus offsetting in terms of what's going into Lake Simcoe. So while the entire city is covered certainly by the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan as an act as it relates to the health of Lake Simcoe, the actual review is really limited to environmental risks and features. Most of what Katie's team, or Ms. Thompson's team, is looking at is actually subsurface most times, or the ability for runoff to then impact either the lake or the subsurface.
Right, and I gathered that, but I also heard earlier that it was both surface water and well or I don't know, subterranean, whatever the right verbiage is. The second thing, just to ask on that is, so the Conservation Authority looks at, let's say, 100-year storms still, I believe, and the effect of a 100-year storm with development in a place, and then what that could do to the surrounding area, whether it's a creek or a lake or what have you. Is there any overlap there, or is it that's not what we take into consideration when we're?
Do you want to look into that? Sorry, thanks.
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Mayor Nuttall. We are looking at the water quality in relation to the sewer use bylaw and the on-site activities, and would they be creating a significant drinking water threat under the Clean Water Act? We're not assessing flood risk and flood volumes.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Nixon.
There we go. Through you, Chair Hamilton. Curious, it was mentioned earlier, something that Councillor Reitman brought up about the reduction in the use of salt over the last, I think it was 3 years, you said, and it's down 30%, something like that. I'm curious as to whether we know how much of that is due to just using maybe a better quality of salt, maybe mixing it more with sand, maybe just distributing it lighter, or is it, or how much of that is just a result of the fact that our winters are not kind of what they were 3 years ago? How much of that is weather related, and how much would be more from a proactive nature? And I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but just curious.
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Councillor Nixon. We haven't looked at that specifically, but I would say it's likely a combination of all three: warmer winters, mixed precipitation, and our operations team does a lot of proactive winter control. So they monitor the weather, they'll get out there and do proactive brining, which results in us needing to use less salt overall.
Okay, great, thank you. And also, just to follow up, any idea what 30% reduction in the cost-wise for the use of 30% less salt would be in savings on an average year?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Councillor Nixon, I'm not sure, but we can ask that question of operations and report.
Yeah, I'm sure we're looking at hundreds and hundreds and thousands of pounds of salt. I mean, that would add up. Oh, I may have an answer.
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Councillor Nixon, I think it is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we can definitely get you that number.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
And maybe on salt, that would be a great one to bring back to this committee, especially it's a message we like to get out there to the public, that Smart About Salt message. So maybe we could commit to bringing this one back, and I know Ms. Thompson would probably be really pleased to have the opportunity to talk about salt.
Thank you. Any final questions? Seeing none, thank you. I had a couple questions, but they were all answered. I think I really appreciate you guys taking the time and presenting these things. As Ms. Banfield stated very accurately, this isn't the type of stuff that comes across our desk often, so it's very nice for us to be educated and really understand the processes. One, so that we can speak in the community when questions come up or with developers, and I think it also gives an opportunity to have dialogue with you and look at, there's always opportunities for improvement. But again, just really thank you for the work that you're doing from a risk perspective. It's obviously so vital to the operations of the city and just something that doesn't often get paid enough attention to. So appreciate Ms. Banfield and Ms. Back and Ms. Thompson for the work you do. Thank you. Okay, I will now move us into the second presentation, and I will call upon Jason Zimmerman, Supervisor of Transit Operations and Infrastructure, to approach the podium to provide the presentation concerning the 2025 Transit Network Service Adjustments. And sorry, we'll also consider agenda item 7.2, which is Barrie Transit 2025 Network Service Adjustments, as it accompanies the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton. My name is Jason Zimmerman, as you just mentioned, and I'm going to present to you on our 2025 service adjustments to support the staff report we brought to this committee. So I'll just get right into it. So as you all know, we made some service changes earlier this year, which was phase one of the new network. Through the staff report, we're proposing to not do the phase two as previously approved, and to change direction in that plan. I'll get into some of the reasons as to the why, but first to speak a little bit to what we did achieve in phase one this year. So one of the things that was launched in the spring was the new 400 Express route, which is operating quite well and building a good base ridership. And we're getting really positive feedback. People are getting from the far north to the far south a lot quicker, which is really great. Ridership, a lot of times when you make service changes in a city, you do see a dip in your ridership. We did not see that. We saw a static level of ridership. We've maintained our ridership, and in fact, we've increased ridership in a few areas, and some of those areas being the low ridership areas, which have led to some of the service adjustments that we've planned. And Transit on Demand. Transit on Demand has been an excellent service option for low ridership areas in the city. It's proven itself really well since we launched it in 2020, and then we grew it in the spring to add 4 more additional zones. Transit on Demand provides services to those low ridership areas. It's continuing to perform at plus 90% on-time performance. And at the time we wrote this staff report, it was 4.3 stars on average out of 5, and now it's averaging 4.5 stars out of 5. So continuing to improve, and we're continuing to make adjustments to it to help it to improve. So why the change in plan? Why are we doing 2025 service adjustments and not phase 2 of the new transit network? Well, a little bit of that is because we want to minimize that level of change. The city's going through a lot of changes next year. We don't want to add to those changes by impacting our riders too much too fast. And another big reason is what we've realized through the service adjustments that we made this past spring is construction has a good level of impact and on our service performance. As much as construction is great, and we love to see these new roads and new bridges being built over the highways to help us get around the city a lot faster, there is a bit of a growing pains as we move through these construction projects on these major arterial roads, and those have a negative impact at times on some of the performance of our routes. So when we launch a new route and we're asking people to change their travel habits to adjust to that new route, and then immediately that new route goes into one or multiple detours, and then adjusting them even more, that isn't always great on our riders. So moving forward in the long-term plans, as we work towards improving the services in the city, we'll be looking at major construction impacts and how we can plan around those to limit that level of impact on our riders. And again, public feedback. We look at trending feedback. We hear certain things over and over again from certain riders, so we react to that. We listen to our riders and we react to that trending feedback. So some of these service adjustments help to meet with that trending feedback. And again, service expansion. As previously approved by council to expand Transit on Demand into these new home developed areas in the Salem-Hewitt's areas, we'll be expanding service out to those areas next year. First change that we'll be looking to do would be adjusting Route 2 and removing the Zone G in the Sproul and Cross area of the city. And what we're seeing there is basically growth in ridership. Growth in ridership in such a way that it's pushing our service standards that were previously approved towards the 8 boardings per hour. Once a area of the city starts to creep towards that 8 boardings per hour, Transit on Demand no longer becomes a sustainable solution for that area. This area previously was showing, when it was previously serviced by a fixed route, it was averaging 4 boardings per hour. In the last 6 to 8 months, it's moving up towards 7 boardings per hour and trending towards that, pushing that service standard. So how do we accommodate for that? We're going to adjust the Route 2 to service that area. Also to meet with travel patterns that we've seen from the people traveling from Zone G, a lot of them heading to downtown or they're heading down to Mapleview to Park Place. We're going to give them a bus that'll take them straight there. Also, we're going to look at adjustments to the Route 8. First, Route 8, we would be adjusting in the north end. Just a small adjustment in the north end up in the Springdale and Cundles area. We would bring that route down to cover that area to kind of meet with putting fixed route to that area, which we had planned in the phase 2 of the new network. As well, we'd be looking at removing Transit on Demand in those areas where we were overlapping the service to areas where we were planning to remove the Route 8. We would remove those Transit on Demand areas and just make those minor adjustments to those zones in the north. Fun fact, Route 8 operates in a figure 8 pattern. And like a figure 8, it has a crossing point in the middle. So to help that route operate better and to essentially help more people get to our new terminal, we're going to move that crossing point to the new terminal. So that's just going to come south about 2 kilometers to the new terminal, and be minor adjustments to the Route 8 in order to do that. As well, through that adjustment, we're going to work towards achieving what we had wanted to do in phase 2 of the new network, was to add service on Lakeshore. Route 8 services a greater majority of the city, and now bringing all these people directly to the Lakeshore will help more people get to events, alleviate some of the strains on our parking, and get more people to the beach. Just to meet with our service growth, Salem and Hewitt's, we're going to add 3 new transit on demand zones to those new developed areas. One of the zones that does start to look like it's going to push our standards is the Zone D. So we would just take the bottom end of that Zone D and cover it with one of these new zones in the Hewitt's area. And that's also to help people in the Zone D to get where they're going faster. People in the current Zone D, it's a larger, longer ride to get to your nearest hub or to where you're going to go. So this would just, reduce travel times, help people get where they're going a little quicker. And then that's basically a look at what the what the 2025 network would look like after these adjustments are made. We'd be looking to do the Route 2 and removal of Zone G adjustment at the beginning of next year, because we do see that as a priority, and that's something we'd want to do as sooner than later. The adjustments to Route 8 and the minor adjustments to the North TOD zones we'd be looking to do when we move to the new terminal, of course, which would be over the summer. And then the Salem and Hewitt's would be when we get the additional growth buses that we need for that service, which again looks like it would be next summer. And that's all I have. Quick, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Straight to the point. We like it. I'll open it up to questions from committee members first. Mayor Nuttall.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to take the opportunity to not ask a question, if you'll forgive me, Madam Chair, and just say thank you to our transit team, because number one, you stepped out on a limb and worked to make it as efficient as possible and help as many people as possible get from home to work or groceries or whatever it is. Many of the things worked well. Some worked better than we thought, and there were some things that needed to be adjusted and revised. And to take that, then come back so quickly, turn it around to fix it, I think is exactly what we should be doing. And I think this is a big success that will grow. We've had feedback from drivers, from residents. You see your feedback inside of your own data analytics that you're doing. But one of the things that I learned when I was in Israel is in their culture, failing isn't failing, it's the next step towards success. And so when we have these small things that didn't go exactly according to plan, and we adjust and then move forward, that's part of a very, very, very good process. And I just want to say thank you to our transit team for doing that, for taking it on, and for staying on top of the data so that we can move forward in a productive way. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Any other questions or comments from any committee? Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton, and thanks for the presentation, Mr. Zimmer. Do you feel that with the transit on demand in the areas that aren't serviced now, where they're not going to know a typical route they're going to start with transit on demand, do you find that maybe some of the kind of, complaints of some of the people who lost a fixed route that won't know the difference, do you find that, like in your studies and what you guys are doing and speaking with, that, because in my route, I find that transit on demand, actually, there was, a couple hiccups and stuff like that and just typical stuff, but it actually taught people how to use transit, and it actually showed the increase. It was actually good, and it served the purpose, and I find more people are using transit in my neighborhoods where we're going back to a fixed route. But do you find that maybe when people are used to a fixed route and then we go to transit on demand, where in the Salem, Hewitts, they're not going to know what a fixed route is, but it'll, kind of not educate people how to use transit, but show that it's doable and it works, and it is a means of transportation in the city.
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Deputy Mayor Thompson. Yeah, transit on demand. I mean, it definitely encourages people to be more aware of how they're going to plan their trips to get around the city. It encourages them to look into how they're going to get around more when they're adjusting their travel patterns and that type of thing. When we're looking at adding transit on demand to the new developed areas, we don't do it in the same way that a lot of cities are doing it, where they go door to door. We're building ours stop to stop because if ridership does grow in some of these new areas and then we need to switch it over to fixed, they're already used to walking to that stop. They're already used to where the stop is, and they're going to be basically taking similar direction than they are when they take transit on demand. So we want to make sure that when we're planning into these new areas, that we're planning it in such a way that when we do have to change it to a fixed route later, that it's easier to make that switch. Same as when you have transit on demand added to an area where it's already been a fixed route, similar thing, we use those same stops and we keep it on the same roadways. So that way we're maintaining the same infrastructure, we're keeping things accessible at those stops because accessibility is also very important to us. And basically planning how we can switch both ways as the city grows and ridership grows. I don't know if I answered your question perfectly, but I think
100%.
if you get me talking more transit, I won't stop. So
yeah. I'll end with a comment. When you make changes, nobody likes change to a certain degree, and between Miss Reed and Brent and yourself, you've always been front facing. You deal with like I've had a couple of residents, and you guys have been on the ball and resolved all the issues. So I really do appreciate that. With change, sometimes there's trials and tribulations, but it's worked well, and I think that has a lot to do with you guys and your communication and dealing with the residents. So thank you for that.
Any other questions for members of committee? Any questions from non-members? Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton. First, through you, a comment to Mr. Zimmerman. Thank you so much. I've been tracking along a correspondence you've had for quite some time with a family that has two individuals have special needs, and their transportation support that the support you've given to them has been exceptional. So I just wanted to thank you. I have been reading, have been following along, and I really, you couldn't be a better example of customer service. So thank you. And I do note that that Hearst Drive corridor and the Manette's area, the Brennan area, where this particular family is, still sits in that. There won't be a traditional line going down Hearst or Lakeshore, but just wondering how any feedback on how that area is improving as it relates to the use and understanding of that transit by demand option that runs through that community.
Yeah, through you, Chair Hamilton, to Councillor Harris. Currently, the ridership all along Hearst is well below our standards. And that's a big reason why we chose that area for on-demand. We have heard from a couple folks along Hearst that preferred fixed route over transit on demand. And as you know, we're working as hard as we can to help accommodate their needs because we do care very much for our riders and we do listen to them. But if, ridership trends change and new developments come along in those areas and we see a need for a change in service, we'll react because we have those standards in place to help us make those decisions.
Great. Thanks again. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Hamilton. Through you to Mr. Zimmerman. Just curious, on your second last slide, I'm happy to see that there's expansion of transit on demand into Ward 7, into a few of the areas, especially the new subdivision at Essa and Salem that I have had quite a few inquiries about. But I see that it no longer indicates a route going along Sundew and up Red Oak or which I guess I don't know if they still call it the Bear Creek Special, or is that being impacted at all with these changes, with the transit on demand going into that area?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Councillor Harvey. Yeah, so through the adjustments that we're proposing for next year, we would be no longer, the plan would be to no longer perform the Bear Creek Special, as we call it, where 3 times a day the Route 8 diverts over to service Red Oak and Sundew. And that's mainly because what we do find operationally was when a route diverts from its regular path, and you get new operators in and they don't really know when and where they're supposed to do it, it gets forgotten. And sometimes people get left behind at those stops. So diverting a route from its regular path can create operational difficulties at times. So that's one reason. The other reason is we do see a lot of the people that are a lot of the students mostly that go to the Bear Creek High School from that intersection, traveling to other areas other than where Route 8 takes them. And so we want to provide them with a little more travel options, as well as some of them that live in the new Bear Creek area down at Salem and Essa area, that give them that direct transportation to the high school. So there's a multitude of reasons, but really it comes down to more travel options, more freedom. The other problem is what we see is the times of the Bear Creek Special, and the schools are always changing their bell times, and it's always hard for us to keep up with their changes, whereas Transit on Demand, it's on their schedule. So we put something in there close to the high school, and it can go in there all times of the day. Some kids get out of school early, so they could go and get their bus when they need it. So that was really kind of the decision there for that area.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you. And just to follow up to that, I do appreciate it's probably going to create some efficiencies, and I don't think the kids are going to have any issues trying to use the app when it comes to using TOD, but I guess it would just be about the messaging, and maybe that might not come down to yourself, might be more directed at Miss James Reed and her team, as to, especially with the students, whether we're going to be looking at having some announcements through the school, and also too, when it comes to that whole new subdivision at Essa and Salem, I think it's called Bear Creek Ridge, will there, obviously I've got a newsletter that's going to be up and coming. I can include some of these changes in that, which will hopefully create some efficiencies instead of overlap. But I think maybe having something with the school would probably help any growing pains with the kids, but I think in the long run, they're probably going to appreciate it more, because you are right, there has been times where all of a sudden they're sitting there at 3 o'clock and they're like, where's this bus? And it inadvertently took a different turn going through the normal route. So I do appreciate the expansion, and I think it's going to be a positive move. And ironically, I don't get a lot of transit inquiries, but I know today I was having to converse with Mr. Forsyth in regards to another inquiry, because apparently we've got people moving into Veterans and McKay as soon as February, which is, I was blown away when I was told people were taking occupancy that quick. So thank you for everything that you do, and I think it is important to give you a shout out though too with the Bear Creek Special, because I know at the beginning of the previous school year they had totally messed with the times of the kids coming in and out, and you guys literally pivot in, I don't even think it was 24 hours, and had everything fixed. So thank you to everything that you and your team does.
Thank you. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton. To Mr. Zimmerman, I want to emphasize, like my colleagues, staff have been great just on this file. I'm fortunate to know a lot of the staff on kind of just this general department, or a good number of them in decision-making abilities. And I know them, I trust them, and really good experience, whether it be concerns that I flip once in a while, or even the universal pass transfer thing. I know it was more of a change on in name than in practice, but those are the things that do inspire confidence. As it relates to the 4.5 rating, how do we as a city, how do we account for people that have potentially dropped off? So in anything with customer feedback, there's people that there's the frequent flyers, people who will always have opinions, good, bad, or indifferent. There are people who have never experienced a negative experience and never comment. There are people who have a good experience and will be ambassadors, and there are people that might have a repeated bad experience and then drop off, right? Just like with labor statistics and everything else. So I'm not saying I don't believe the numbers, I believe them, and I respect the process. But I've seen enough, and again, obviously it's anecdotal, seen enough comments not only online, in different platforms online. I'm not just talking a Facebook group, but Reddit seems to be a more curated kind of source of comments. You have to make an account, you don't just go all willy-nilly and move on. Comments that are not constructive get downvoted, they don't get posted. So it's almost like self-selection for credibility, and they work really well with other things that the city does. So I'm wondering how staff accounts for potentially just people who don't want to comment, who give feedback again.
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Councillor Morales. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. You know, not everybody rates it, not everybody comments, but generally what we do see is like when they're either very dissatisfied with the service, they'll rate it and comment, or if they're very satisfied with the service, they'll rate it and comment. As for other ways of finding that information or getting feedback from our riders on the service, we're always open to that. We're always looking for that. We can touch base with our corporate communications experts and see if they can look into Reddit or any other ways out there where we could get more feedback, because yeah, we love the feedback, we love the data, and we're always looking for trending feedback on how we can improve services for our riders.
For sure, and I understand through Chair Hamilton that you have to follow policy and ways of capturing information. There's statistics and things that make it industry standards, but previous politicians have referred to it as the Tim Hortons line. Sometimes a Tim Hortons line comment, that gut check, is enough to at least get the discussion started and direct staff to do another review, more information soliciting. So I'm not saying decision making through Reddit, but like different forums. So back in the old days, it was taverns downtown, or the schools, the churches, whatever you think the resources are. So this one just seems to be a little bit better experience, and I know that the meta world has become a little bit less accessible and also more negative in tone. Hence why I'm bringing this up. I do want to make sorry, Chair Hamilton, I saw Ms. James Reed signal to us, so I'll let her maybe.
Thank you. I just thought I would jump in just to kind of explain the rating system from the Transit on Demand. So it's unlike pretty much any other service that I can think of that we deliver at the city. The way that the Transit on Demand app works is that at the end of your ride, you're given the option to rate it, just so you can rate your Uber experience. And so that's why we're getting that information coming in terms of the 4.5 stars. I just thought that might be helpful to clarify that.
Perfect. No, that's great. That's a great clarification. That's actually a really good segue into my next one, and I'll go quick. I'll be mindful of the time here. So I'll start with a really positive thing that I love. I love Route 100, 101, and some of the figure eight stuff. Like from a structural ones, this has been able to, from my perspective, been able to allow the city staff to reinforce routes that needed maybe a little bit more attention and investment, and then maybe reinvent the ones that didn't. So reallocation resources. So I really like the main routes are really solid. You can see it. You can see the people on the buses, the positive stories I hear about those are really positive. So I want to start with that. With the other routes, and again, I'm not trying to be negative, and just I wrote my comments while listening. I have a bit of an inherent issue with scaling to transit on demand, because in a suburban city like Barrie, transit users aren't usually using it, and I emphasize in a city like Barrie, because they want to, or because they have options to sometimes use it, but I'll use the car, sometimes transit, usually for the most case. They use it because they have to. In a more dense environment, New York, Toronto, people do have the option, and sometimes they prefer it. But in Barrie, and so when we do cuts to public transit, and that includes reallocation of resources, cuts, repivoting, whatever word we want to use, to kind of a sector, which in this case public transportation, that mostly affect people who use it as a lifeline, it has consequences. What I mean by that is, again, anecdotally, sometimes they miss a shift at work. Sometimes they get ridden up. Sometimes they get fired. More consequently, sometimes they pass up on opportunities to apply for jobs that would have otherwise given them a leg up because of whether it's real or perceived inefficiencies in the system. Those are things that I'm hearing and that I'm seeing. And I don't ride the transit, and I don't depend on it as a lifeline. So it's really tough for me to be like, I don't believe it, or the data's not showing that when I'm hearing and seeing these narratives. And they're not usually like negative, no one's swearing, no one's targeting the city. So here's my question, and I don't mean to be dramatic about this one, but I really like the reinforcing reallocation towards main routes. The data is clear. And I personally, I'm not speaking for council, have concerns about the transit on demand model. So why not just outsource transit zones to the private sector, like Uber, like Lyft? Let them do it efficiently because they clearly have a model on that, and then we can focus on the main roads. Or completely opposite of that, why not just kind of revert back to a standard model of coverage everywhere? I'm just kind of curious.
Maybe I'll jump in on that question. Very interesting thought process for that. I was just going to offer that we do have a contract in place with the service provider to offer our transit, so we have to adhere to the provisions with that, so we can't be doing competitive transit within our city. In terms of the model that we put forward previously, before we did phase one, this was meant to be at a cost neutral proposal, as you'll recall. So certainly if council wanted to provide us different direction and wanted us to go away from transit on demand and more fixed routes, there would be a cost associated with that, and that would be something that we could explore and report back to you on.
Okay, perfect, thank you, and my apologies for making our legal team sweat a little bit with my question, not a comment. Thank you, and thank you for the clarity on that. So is that something that will require council direction, or is that something that the information is somewhat easily accessible? Kind of like that chart, I was referring to planning and water earlier, something like if you go with a more full out version, it's going to be this. I'm just wondering because I don't want to tie up staff time.
In terms of the cost?
Yeah, if we wanted to uptick the, I guess, the investment.
I think the team could get that to you pretty quickly. I just don't think we have it right here on the
No, not on the spot. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Not seeing any. I just have a couple, actually, and I think I'm going to echo some things that were already said, but I'll be efficient and quick, hopefully. I do want to say a huge shout out and thank you. I think your level of responsiveness to, obviously, each of us now as councillors, but also to the residents we put you in touch with has been outstanding. So thank you for that. Your willingness to be flexible, to pivot, to actually take feedback and implement changes. I think I have been, pleasantly surprised at that capability. So again, I just want to give a shout out, and I know my colleagues have as well, but I want to recognize that. And then on a positive as well, I think the 400 Express route has been fabulous. I've heard a lot of positive feedback on that. The 4.5 out of 5 stars, also pleasantly surprised to hear that. Not necessarily what I'm hearing, but at the end of the day, I think we probably get hit with more complaints than compliments, right? So I would expect that. I just wonder how that data is collected. Are we able to actually break it down to the different zones so we know that, this route or this zone is actually only 2.5 out of 5? Is there a way to break that down? And I don't need it tonight, but maybe as a follow-up, you could share that with us?
Yeah, through you, Chair Hamilton, we do have that by zone. So we can provide that.
Excellent. Okay. I'm also happy to see some of the new transit on demand zones that will be happening in 2025, specifically in Hewitt's, obviously, self-interest, but in Salem and some of the other communities as well. I think echoing what Councillor Harris said in Route 12, I know we've had plenty of conversations about Route 12, and I think the fact that, a lot of the ridership there that we're used to the old transit services and kind of feel like they had something taken away, and there's probably opportunity for improvement there. I just wonder, you noted that, it's based on ridership and the fact that we didn't have the volumes there. How do we assess going forward? Because I'm sort of afraid that people are going to stop using it, right? So where's that balance in terms of how do we assess, based on future growth and based on people's frustrations with transit on demand? Is there a point in time where we look at, and maybe it's based on the rating system, but what factors would contribute to a reassessment of that area specifically?
One factor we're seeing just with the recommendations. So as Jason indicated previously, when boardings hit to 8 boardings per hour, that's when our policy standard transfers or makes a recommendation to transfer back to council from transit on demand to a fixed route. So you're seeing that evidenced in the changes that are proposed, and if we start seeing that in any other routes, and our team is monitoring that regularly, then we would come forward with a proposal to make that transfer.
Thank you. That's helpful information. And in terms of the transit on demand average wait, again, I don't know if that's data that's readily available. I'm assuming we collect that. What is sort of a just average, if you can share, in terms of wait times for folks that are ordering transit on demand services?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, well, we do provide the service where you can get your bus within 20 minutes. I do believe our average wait time is 11 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Again, great to hear, because we hear anecdotally, like I've got emails from people, I had to wait over an hour. I waited up to 90 minutes. And when these are people's lifelines to get to work, it's hard to kind of differentiate. Is that accurate? Was that due to, traffic congestion? I don't know. So some of this data is helpful for us to have. And then finally, I just want to echo the communication aspect of things, especially in some of the newer areas. I do find it complex. I'm not a transit user. I will say that. I have now taken transit a handful of times. I had the opportunity to help a neighbor whose English was second language. And I found it difficult. It actually took me hours to download the app. I had to call Service Barrie. Like I played as though I didn't use my status or my position as a counselor. I went through it like an average citizen trying to help somebody. And I struggled. I struggled to figure out how to access transit on demand. I struggled to figure out where I was supposed to stand on the right street. We went to the wrong one. So I have since used it now, but it took me a couple of times. So I'm just sharing that with you from my personal experience. I'm educated. I've got a couple degrees. I've got a master's degree. I don't have a master's in public transportation, and it wasn't easy to navigate. So I'm just picking up on that communication piece. Whatever we can do to help educate, communicate how to use it, there might be a need there, because if I'm struggling, I'm sure there's other people, and as we're experiencing a lot of growth in our communities, especially in the south end of Barrie, I think there's opportunity there. So I do want to say thank you to the team. I think you've been very receptive to feedback, and I don't want this to be any negative things that we're sharing, but at the end of the day, I think it's really important that we're constantly evaluating what we're doing, and if we do have to make changes or further investments, at the end of the day, this is a key service that we provide, and we have to get it right. So I'm kind of in the same mindset of Councillor Morales. If there's are opportunities where we need to invest more, then maybe we need to look at that. So again, thank you for the presentation. I think it's very good dialogue, helpful for us to hear what's happening in other wards, because sometimes I think, oh, this is just a Ward 10 issue, and I don't know what's going on in the other wards or what their experiences are, whether positive or negative. So I think this was a very timely presentation, and hopefully will encourage some more dialogue to come too. So thank you. All right, moving us into then 7.2, since it accompanied the presentation, I'm just going to read the title, Barrie Transit 2025 Network Service and Adjustments.
So moved.
Approved. There are no standing items, no referred items. Moving on to agenda item number 6, reports of advisory committees. There are 2 advisory committee reports to be received. 6.1, report of the Active Transportation and Sustainability Advisory Committee dated October 3rd, 2024. That is to be received. And 6.2, report of the Communities in Bloom Committee dated November 5th, 2024, also to be received. And now we'll move into item number 7, reports to the committee. We had 1 item held, 7.1, Bayview Disc Golf Course, and I believe that was held by Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton. I'll put the motion on the floor as printed, and through you to staff. I was wondering if we could get kind of a breakdown. I looked at the price, and it was shocking, to be honest. As one thing about disc golf is that they actually construct the course within the environment with, minor changes and stuff, but, not like typical golf where they're mowing fairways and, they kind of play within the environment where they are. So I was a little bit shocked at the cost. If maybe we could have.
Through you, Chair Hamilton. Oh, sorry, Ms. Banfield. To you, Deputy Mayor Thompson. There's a range of costs in the staff report this time. There's too many unknowns at this point. We did some preliminary investigation with city forestry staff compared to our existing forestry contracts. There could be as much as $80,000 alone, potentially in vegetation removals, depending on what the extreme is. We're potentially looking at 3 creek crossings without actually having design to put in front of the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority. We did meet with them to have some preliminary consultation. Those costs could be extremely high. If they wanted concrete abutments, for example, the one bridge that we are suggesting could be reconstructed to permit maintenance field crossing. That could be a $150,000 bridge. There's a range of estimates, and included in there are also our soft costs, different contingencies, permit fees, staff recoveries, and things as well. But I will comment that staff were surprised too as we started to work through the project.
Just seeing the cost of what a 9-hole course could cost, has this kind of maybe made staff look at the existing 18-hole as, you know, the utilization is third probably in Canada, I think is what it states in the report. And might be number one if we had the climate like BC and stuff. It's, you know, we have a down period due to climate in Barrie. And looking at the cost of what 9 holes obviously wouldn't be able to replace the 18-hole. It would be kind of a temporary fix. Is there something where we're looking at maybe, you know, prolonging the life of that course due to that?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, we spoke with corporate facility staff in preparation of the report. They are in the process of undertaking the feasibility study to look at the efficiency improvements in the landfill operations. They are not expecting those findings to be ready until Q1 of 2025. So it's a little bit premature to indicate whether it's a yes or no until we get that report back.
Thank you.
Yep, Mayor Nettle, go ahead.
Yeah, could I'd like to put a motion on the floor to defer this until such a time that we receive the updated report on what will be needed, the 18-hole course, the existing, I think it's Sandy Hollow, is that where it is? So I'll put that on the floor and go from there.
So the motion's on the floor, and it's non-debatable. And can we ask questions?
I think sadly it is debatable because it's a deferral, not a referral, but we can pretend it's not debatable.
Yeah. That's fine, it's getting deferred. We can talk afterwards, so. Okay, all those in favor of a deferral? And it's approved. Now I don't have to go back to the main motion because that main motion was deferred. Sorry, still learning here. All right, we're moving into item number 8, items for discussion, and there are none, so we will move into adjournment. This concludes the Infrastructure and Community Investment Committee meeting. General Committee meeting will begin at 7 p.m. Meeting is adjourned.